Chapter 3, we're going over the visual elements of art. Our learning objectives, we're going to be able to describe the characteristics of line, identify two general categories of shapes and their different qualities, differentiate between 2D and 3D depictions of mass, summarize how technical devices such as implied depth and linear perspective are used to render space in 2D words of art, discuss how visual artists can express or embody the passage of time and the concept of motion in their work, explain the characteristics of light and how it's used as a medium in the work of contemporary artists, describe the physical properties and relationships of color, describe how texture aids the expressive quality of an artwork. Here we have Edward Hopper's New York Movie from 1939. We have lines that separate the walls and ceiling. Shapes suggest mass of the balcony seats above. Space seems to recede from the viewer. Time and motion are represented. You have people there that are going to eventually leave. The lady is there. It's a frozen moment of time, and you can see on the movie screen there's a blurry type movie showing there. There's color contrasts. We have a complementary contrast of red and greens. And there's texture in the seats and texture in the column. Here's a bigger view. Line, we're on line. We're going to describe the characteristics of line. Our primary visual means for recording and symbolizing ideas, observations, and feelings are with line. It's an extension of a point wherein length dominates over width. Line shows paths of action. Lines in space are principal elements in this artwork by McCall, You and I, Horizontal 3. Characteristics of line. Line can be active or static, aggressive or passive, sensual or mechanical. It can define boundaries or imply volumes or masses. It can be grouped to depict light, shadow, patterns, and textures. Characteristics of line. Attributed to Toru Kiyonobu, 1, the kabuki actor on the left, has curvy lines and it suggests slow rhythmic motion. And then whereas Toru Kiyotada, an actor of the Kiyakawa clan in a dance movement of violent motion, we have angular lines that express swift and violent motion. This is more organic and this is more geometric. We have Gago reticularia takes lines into the third dimension, short lines in varying degrees of density. It's really chaotic. Fred Sandback, Untitled Sculptural Study, 6-part construction on the right. It's a more organized array. It suggests elegant open rectangles. The mood between the two works differs widely. It depends entirely on the artist's use of line. This has lots of degrees of line, very chaotic looking, very energetic. And this one is a lot more calm. These lines depict space. Characteristics of line we have here: a textural cat by Kiki Smith. Many prints made up of almost entirely of lines. She has etched lines on a metal plate, one line for each of the cat's hairs. Eyes and foot pads are slightly shaded. All else is done with line. Everything's depicted with line in this cat. It's a bigger cat. Implied line suggests visual connections. It can serve as an underlying organizational structure. So I've always known them as being called lines of sight, or these compositional lines that you see in the triangles on the right side. So we have Andrea De Leone, Tobit burying the dead. Figures in the lower foreground form a triangle. Figures above form another triangle through postures, hand positions, or the direction they look. So they aren't drawn lines, but they imply lines with just these positions that they're in. And then also implied lines occur when values or colors meet to create a visual line that is not a drawn line. Shape is the area within the outline of an object or figure. Two-dimensional shapes appear flat and they only have height and width. Three-dimensional shapes have mass or volume and they have height, width, and depth. Geometric shapes are precise and regular, circles, triangles, and squares. They're often made with the help of tools such as rulers or a compass. We have a lot of shapes, geometric shapes in Tori Kiyotada's Actor. The most common shapes in the human-made world are geometric. Organic shapes are irregular. They're often curving or rounded. They seem more relaxed and informal than geometric shapes. We have organic shapes in the Kabuki Actor image on the right. Most shapes in nature are organic. Biomorphic also suggests shapes based on natural forms. Here, the picture plane is a flat picture surface. The shape creates a second shape out of a background area. The dominant shapes or figures are positive shapes. And then we have the ground or negative, which are the shapes in the background. So you can see clearly in this drawing of the ram that the dominant is the ram itself, the animal, and then the negative space is all of the background. Here we have a figure-ground relationship. If you've seen the faces-vases image, it's a fundamental aspect of perception. It allows us to sort out and interpret what we see. There's a shift in awareness needed to see the white negative shapes in a shape of space. So more clearly on the left you can see the vase, and then more clearly on the right you notice the faces more clearly. There's a shape of space. We have implied space. The square looks like it's receding. Paul D'Agostino, the rarely glimpsed junkfish. Simple means to create a game of positive and negative shapes with his imagery. The positive shapes are the lighter shapes, and the one with the junkfish and maybe the little plant life below, and then the areas where the text are, those are positive shapes versus negative is in the background where it's black. The positive shapes on the left are the sculpture, the piece of wood, and then the rod and the fish. Mass is three-dimensional. There's a physical bulk of a solid body of material that has height, width, and depth. So volume equals a shape in 3 dimensions. Mass equals volume plus density. Mass in 3 dimensions. We're going to look at Botero's horse. He has mass. He's Botero's work. He has always bulbous figures, and so he's bulbous, and the material being bronze, he looks heavy. He takes up, he has height, width, and depth, and he's a closed form because he has a base underneath him and he's not reaching out into space. So he's closed. This is an open form because in Giacometti's sculpture here, he's reaching out and activating space with the arms. It's called man pointing, and it conveys a sense of fleeting presence. So at any moment, he can put those arms down and maybe walk away. Mass in 2 dimensions. We have Paula Modersohn-Becker, mother and child. There's implied mass, fills the picture plane. Shading suggests bulging, curving flesh. Use both composition and shading to imply mass. Here's the image, mother and child. Actual mass versus implied mass. Actual mass occupies 3-dimensional space and has measurable volume and weight. Implied mass creates the illusion of possessing volume, having weight, and occupying 3-dimensional space. So the painting is implied mass. Actual mass would be like Botero's horse. Space. Indefinable, general receptacle of all things. How artists organize space is one of their most important creative considerations. Space in 3 dimensions. Space is most difficult to convey in words and pictures. To experience 3D space, we must be in it. Architects, especially concerned with the qualities of space. We have space in 3 dimensions here. We have Cesar Pelli's North Terminal at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. It takes passengers' experience of space into account. It's divided a huge interior space into smaller modules. Space in 3 dimension, Doug Wheeler's essay MI75 DZNY12 creates a feeling of infinite space. Space in 2 dimensions, drawing and painting, we see the space of the surface all at once. Space in 2 dimensions, we have Pool in the Garden. It's an early Egyptian painting showing little depth. Objects are portrayed from most easily identifiable angles. The pool is shown from above. Trees, fish, and birds are shown from the side. Implied depth. Almost any mark on a picture plane begins to give the illusion of depth, and it gives clues to spatial depth. This has overlap and diminishing size, vertical placement, overlap, vertical placement, and diminishing size. Implied depth. Viewer may be conscious of a picture's actual flat surface and the illusion of depth. Artists can emphasize either the reality or the illusion or strike a balance between the extremes. We have Paul Cézanne's Still Life with Apples. It suggests depth in various ways. We have the horizontal line of the tabletop. We have a gap in the middle. There's pictorial depth by overlapping and vertical placement of fruit. There's flattened overall space with patches of parallel brush strokes, and then there's space behind the tabletop is unclear. Linear perspective. Perspective is any means of representing 3D objects in space on a 2D surface. Linear perspective is perfected during the 15th century in Italy and based on the way we see. 1-point linear perspective showing what it looks like below the horizon line and what it looks like above the horizon line. And then at the bottom we have 2-point linear perspective. So you have 2 vanishing points. With linear perspective, here's the example of the School of Athens by Raphael. He used perspective for emphasis. This image shows how the angles converge on a vanishing point. In atmospheric perspective, it's a nonlinear means for giving an illusion of depth. It's created by, as things recede into the space, the colors become duller and things become less detailed, a little more fuzzy because it's further away. So we have Asher Brown Durand, Kindred Spirits image. It provides a sense of vast distances in North American wilderness. Implied deep space appears as an extension of the space we occupy. Here's another example of atmospheric perspective. We have Xun Zhou's Poet on a Mountaintop. We have near and distant mountains suggested by washes of ink and color on white paper. Light gray of the farthest mountain implies space and atmosphere. Time is the fourth dimension. It's invisible but can be made perceptible in art. The passage of time. In non-Western cultures teach time as cyclic. The Aztec calendar stone is an example. In Judeo-Christian tradition of Western culture teaches time is linear. In the Saceta image on the right, the meeting of St. Anthony and St. Paul. So cyclic. Time versus linear, the meeting of St. Anthony and St. Paul. The passage of time. The Crazy Cat comic expresses linear conception. In film and television, the impression of time can be manipulated. Christian Mark Clay's The Clock on the right. A linear representation. Time can be manipulated in film. Implied motion. Implied motion gives lifelike feeling. We have the Dancing Krishna, which portrays Hindu God as a playful child. We have Umberto Boccioni's Dynamism of a Cyclist. It's a futurist movement. The artist regarded motion as speed as most important subjects. And then Jenny Holzer on the far right. She has a clever use of implied motion with the words going down this space. Here's the Dancing Krishna. Implied motion. Dynamism of a cyclist. And then Jenny Holzer. Actual motion is when artists harness forces of wind and water. We have Alexander Calder's mobiles, which rely on air movement. With light, everything we see is made visible by light. It can be directed, reflected, refracted, diffracted, or diffused. Source, color, intensity, and direction of light greatly affect the way things appear. Seeing light. The way light falls influences how we see the subject. Daniel Chester French, the sculpture of Abraham Lincoln. The sunlight made Lincoln seem like a frightened man. And then the shadows make him look a lot more serious and stoic. Value, we have relative lightness and darkness of surfaces is value. He looks scared on the left because of the sunlight and more ominous on the right with the shadows. Implied light. We have value perceived as a relationship rather than an isolated form. We have a dark light relationship. Same gray value appears to change from one end to the other. Value of background changes. Implied light, we have Francois Bonvin self-portrait. He's in a dark room with only one light source, and so the lighting is very dramatic. Chiaroscuro, Chiaro means light, oscuro means dark. So we have this drama. It creates illusion that figures have roundness and bulk. Chiaroscuro. Light as a medium. Some use artificial light as their medium. Paul Chan, The Seven Lights. Shadows show objects seemingly tumbling. Light as a medium with Keith Saunier's Motordom. He uses intense colors that are provided by light. Light as a medium. Keith Saunier, Turning Light into Art. It draws from experience growing up with electric fences, the use of light. Viewer becomes participant because the emitted light is part of the work. The psychological and physical space, transformers and wiring are often visible. And the human scale of Heartbeast. Keith Saunier and Heartbeast. Color is a component of light. It affects us directly. It modifies our thoughts, our moods, our actions, even our health. It expresses ourselves through color. Cultures follow established customs. The physics of color. Objects that appear to have color are merely reflecting the colors that are present in the light that illuminates them. Different wavelength for each color. Red has the longest wavelength. It travels more rapidly than blue, which is a shorter wavelength. White light going through a prism to create the spectrum of color, which we know as Roy G. Biv. Pigments and light. There's local color, the color that appears to our eyes as that of an object. It's determined by wavelengths of light being reflected or absorbed. If all wavelengths absorbed, object appears black. If all the wavelengths are reflected, the object appears white. Pigments and light. Achromatic is without the property of hue or colors. Black, white, and their combination gray, often referred to as neutrals. Colors are distinguishable from three variables. Hue is a particular wavelength of a spectral color. For an example, green. Hue is a color. Pigments and light. Colors are distinguishable from three variables. Value, which is the relative lightness or darkness of a color. Adding black produces a shade of color. Adding white produces a tint of color. And also they are distinguishable in intensity or saturation. So it's the purity of the color. Here's the color wheel. We have the primary colors, secondary, and tertiary or intermediate colors. Okay, pigments and light. The three pigments primaries are red, yellow, and blue. Pigment mixtures are called subtractive color mixtures. Duller and darker as absorptive qualities combine. Here's subtractive color mixture. Pigments and light. The three light primaries are red, orange, green, and blue, violet. Produce white light when combined. They're additive color mixtures. So we're talking about light primaries. When you add them together, you get white. Color wheel. The concept is first developed in the 17th century by Isaac Newton. It's based on 12 pure hues. Primary are red, yellow, blue. Secondary are orange, green, and violet. Intermediate are the mixture of the primaries and secondaries to create red, orange, yellow-green, blue-green, blue-violet, and red-violet. Intermediate is also known as tertiary. Warm colors on the left and cool on the right. We have warm is associated with like fire, cool, ice, and water. Color wheel. The relative warm and cool difference is seen in any combination of hues. The blue-green side seems psychologically cool. The red-orange side seems psychologically warm. Color printing separations in the detail of Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Red, blue, green color palettes from GIMP, an image editing application. Color wheel. Color pickers or online palettes on computers. Color mixtures retaining a high level of brightness. Color schemes or color groupings that provide distinct color harmonies. For monochromatic, is based on variations in the value intensity of a single hue, like the blue. Very coarse, untitled. Analogous is based on colors adjacent on the color wheel. They're side by side, containing the same pure hue. So like red, orange, and yellow are considered analogous. They are a family of colors. Very coarse, untitled, white, multiple interband, and beveled. Very monochromatic. Color schemes, analogous. We have Jennifer Bartlett's Path, which is a 2-panel work which includes colors that harmonize. That one. And complementary emphasizes 2 hues directly opposite of each other on the color wheel. So I always remember that from like red and green are opposite of each other on the color wheel, and complementary are Christmas colors. So you can remember that. Complementary are the opposites. Analogous are side by side. So the example we have here is Keith Haring's Untitled Square Head with 3 eyes. Right here. Red and green are opposite, and they create a visual pop. Texture. Tactile qualities of surfaces or visual representations of those qualities. Tactile. Texture can be experienced through touching or visual suggestion. Actual textures can be felt. They're tactile, and they're used by sculptors and architects. Simulated or implied textures are created to look like something other than paint. So simulated, it's like drawing a picture of a fluffy rabbit, but you can't touch and feel the rabbit, but it is a simulated texture because it looks soft. Texture, rude tactile experience within Merritt Oppenheim's object. Pleasant texture of fur, contrasts with the idea of putting it in one's mouth. No thanks. Textures, combining texture in one object, is typical in many traditional Native American cultures. We have varied textures of man's bodice by making it experiencing it multisensory. A lot of different textures. Buckskin, buffalo hide, deer fur, beads, porcupine quills. So very tactile. Here we have a simulated texture, but the paint brush marks itself could, if you rubbed your finger across the surface of the painting, that would be tactile. So Vincent van Gogh's The Starry Night, we have rich tactile surface as expressive device. So we have thick brush strokes of paint, and we have textural rhythms. In this image, we have digital texture. So digital animators have tools to simulate a wide variety of textures. We have Ali Abreu's Boy in the World. It's a bigger image of Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. I think we went the wrong way. Yeah, there we go. There's a bigger image of Ali Abreu's textural image here, Boy in the World, movie still.